message tonight. Don't forget, if you want one of his prayer cards, they're on the back table. And his wife couldn't make it tonight, but if you want, grab one of those, put it on your fridge or somewhere that you can just remind yourselves to pray for him every day, and appreciate him being here again tonight.
stand still, he calls us to follow. And I want to say it like this. If he's calling me, I don't want to argue. I don't want to analyze it. I don't want to delay it. I just want to follow him and heed the call. That is what it comes down to. Not emotion, not music, not a moment, but obedience. Everybody hears him at some point, but not everybody follows him. And the difference between breakthrough and bondage, freedom and frustration, salvation and staying the same, is whether you get up and follow. The question tonight is whether you will follow him where he leads you, or are you going to stay in your seat? I wonder tonight how many of us are sitting where we are. How many are wondering what would you have done if you were in Mary's spot? Mary didn't stay, she moved. And that brings us to the next point, full fragrance. John 12:3 continues to say, then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. She didn't just come with fearless faith, she came with full fragrance. Because when Mary finally gets to Jesus, she doesn't hesitate, she doesn't ration it, she doesn't measure it out, she breaks the box and pours it all out. Not a drop reserved, not a portion saved, no backup plan kept hidden. Pours it out completely. Real worship is never partial. Real worship is never cautious. It's never calculated or controlled. Real worship is full fragrance. Because the text doesn't say she just anointed his feet. It says the house was filled with the odor of the ointment, which means what she poured out on Jesus didn't stay private. It became public. What she gave didn't stay contained. It filled the atmosphere. That's what happens when real worship is real. It changes the room. Some of us have been given God drops when he's worthy of the entire bottle. You give him Sunday morning, but not Sunday night. You give him a song, but not your secret life. You give him your lips, but not your lifestyle. You give him a moment, but not your mind. And we call that worship. But Mary didn't give a moment, she gave everything. And here's the confrontation tonight. God is not looking for controlled worship. He's not looking for convenient worship. He's not looking for contained worship. He's looking for something that is poured out, because anything you refuse to pour out, you will eventually try to protect. And anything you protect, you will never place at his feet. But Mary broke the box. Let me tell you what that means. She broke access to her backup. She broke access to her security. She broke access to her comfort, and she broke access to what she could have fallen back on later. Because when you break the box, there is no plan B. Some of us have never worshiped like that. You've never prayed like that. You've never surrendered like that, because deep down you still want control. You still want something in reserve, something untouched, something that we can go back to and say, if this God thing doesn't work out, I have something to fall back on. But Mary shows us real worship burns the bridge back. Because when she poured it out, there was no recovering it or putting it back. There was no saving it for later. You can't follow Jesus with a safety net. You can't serve God with an escape plan, and you can't worship him with a backup idol in your pocket. It's all or nothing, and it may not be popular preaching in 2026, but it's still biblical. The house didn't get filled until the box got broken. The atmosphere didn't shift until the ointment was poured. The fragrance didn't spread until everything was released. And that's how revival works too. It doesn't come when people hold back. It comes when people pour out. So let's get real for a moment tonight. Some of us are wondering why our spiritual life feels dry, why our prayer life feels empty, why our worship seems to fall flat, why you can sit in church and just feel nothing through the songs, through the preaching. Maybe it's not because God is absent. Maybe it's because nothing is being poured out. Because when there's nothing poured out, there's no fragrance. And when there's no fragrance, there's no filling. Mary filled the house because she emptied herself. And I want to press this tonight. What are you still holding? What are you still protecting? What is still sealed? What God is saying, break it. Because until it breaks, it cannot bless. Until it's poured, it cannot perfume. Until it's surrendered, it cannot shift the atmosphere. I wonder tonight, if God shook this house with your level of surrender, would anything shift? Or are we still too controlled, too careful, and contained? Because God is not looking for contained worship. He's looking for full fragrance. And that leads us somewhere deeper. Because it's one thing to break the box, but it's another to fall at his feet. Our next point is falling at his feet. Luke chapter 7, verse 38 says, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Because real worship without walls doesn't just move towards Jesus, it ends at his feet. I want you to feel the weight of this, because she didn't just stand over him, she fell beneath him. She didn't posture herself above the moment, she positioned herself under his presence. That's where worship gets real. That's where it gets deep. She's not performing for anyone. She's not proving anything to anybody. She's not protecting anything anymore. She's broken, she's weeping, and she's low at his feet. I want to say it like this tonight. There is no such thing as prideful worship at the feet of Jesus. You can't stay arrogant where Jesus is Lord. You can't stay controlled where Jesus is King. You can't stay polished where Jesus is dealing with your brokenness, because his feet is where everything false dies. At his feet is where pride, shame, self-image, and excuses die. And Mary is not just worshiping with music, she's worshiping with her tears. She's not just expressing emotion, she's exposing her heart. She's having a breakdown that leads to breakthrough. Some of us tonight are afraid of breaking in front of people, but you will never get to healing until something breaks in you. What stays contained never gets delivered. What stays hidden never gets healed. And what stays guarded never gets grace. And I know this is countercultural, but we live in a world that tells us, hold it together, stay composed, keep your image, don't let them see your emotion. But the kingdom of God works the opposite way. The lowest place becomes the highest encounter. Brokenness becomes a doorway to blessing, and tears become the language of transformation. And she is at his feet, washing, weeping, wiping, and worshiping. And I want you to see this. She doesn't have a towel in her hand. She has her hair, which means she's taking what represents her glory, her identity, her dignity, and she is laying it down in surrender, because at his feet, even your image becomes secondary. Some of us are so concerned with how we look, we never really get delivered. We're too concerned about appearances to ever really get healed. Too concerned about reputation to ever really get restored. Mary didn't care who saw her fall. She knew she was worthy of her fall. And let me tell you tonight, every real encounter with Jesus will eventually bring you low. Not to shame you, but to save you. Not to humiliate, but to heal you. Some of us have never been low in his presence. You've been near him, but never beneath. You've been around him, but never surrendered to him. You've been in the room, but never at his feet. And I wonder what would happen if we stopped managing our image and started surrendering your heart. Because this story tonight, Mary shows us something powerful. You don't rise in grace until you fall at his feet. And here's the truth. This is where worship without walls always leads, because once you fall at his feet, you're ready for what only grace can do next. And that leads us to the final truth tonight. Forgiven and freed. Luke 7:48 says, and he said unto her, thy sins are forgiven. Here it is, the final weight, the final breaking, the final release. She's forgiven and freed. Because everything we've seen up to this point, fearless faith, full fragrance, falling at his feet, all leads to this moment. The voice of Jesus speaks over her life. And he doesn't say, Mary, try harder. He doesn't say, you got to go fix yourself. He doesn't say, come back when you're better. He says, thy sins are forgiven. And tonight, I want every single one of you to feel this, because Jesus is not responding to her performance. He's responding to her posture. He's not moving by her reputation. He is moved by her repentance. He's not impressed by her box. He's releasing her by his blood. Because at his feet, something always happens that never happens anywhere else. Grace speaks louder than guilt. And I want to say this as clear as I can tonight so there's no confusion. Some of us have been living under the voices that God never spoke over you. Voices of shame, failure, your past, what you used to be, what you did last night, last year, long before you ever walked into this room. And those voices have convinced you can come to church, but you can't be changed. That you could sit and worship, but you can't be washed. That you could hear about Jesus, but you can't be made new. But then Jesus speaks, and one word from him canceled a lifetime of sin built against you. You're forgiven. Not tolerated, not managed, not improved. Forgiven. And I want you to see this, because Mary didn't earn it. She didn't negotiate it. She didn't climb her way into it. She fell into it. She wept into it. She worshiped her way into an encounter where grace spoke louder than the accusation. And that is what happens with grace when worship has no walls. Grace breaks in where shame used to rule. Because the same woman that the room judged, Jesus justified. The same woman the crowd labeled, Jesus liberated. The same woman they criticized, Jesus cleansed. And some of us have been carrying things that God already forgave, but you've been refusing to forgive yourself. And I feel like that's the hardest thing that every single one of us deals with. Saved, covered under the blood, washed, made new, born again, but we let the devil convince us. Remember that thing you did 10 years ago? You're not good enough. You've been living like the cross was never enough. Acting like the blood didn't go that far. Sitting in church singing about grace while still chained to our guilt. Jesus didn't say, feel forgiven. He said, you are forgiven. And in my book, if he said it, that settles it. When Jesus forgives you, heaven doesn't revisit it. He doesn't own it. And you don't get to keep carrying it. Here's where we bring this home. Tonight's not just about forgiveness. It's freedom. Real forgiveness doesn't just clear your record. It changes your reality. It doesn't just erase your past. It releases your future. She walked in carrying a reputation, but walked out carrying redemption. Walked in bound by her story, but walked out free in his mercy. And what you brought in here tonight, I challenge you to leave it at his feet. Because when Jesus speaks forgiveness, chains don't just loosen, they break. It's not just a story about a woman who worshiped. This is a story about a woman who got changed. And if you stay in pride, if you stay in bondage, but if you stay in pride and you stay in bondage, you'll never come. But if you fall in worship, you will walk in freedom. Because worship without walls doesn't just bring you close to the Lord, it brings you out of what held you. And the same Jesus who said, thy sins are forgiven, is still saying it tonight. He's still saving, he's still freeing, he's still forgiving, he's still restoring. But you've got to come to his feet. That's the message. Fearless faith brought her in. Full fragrance filled the room. Falling at his feet broke her open, but forgiveness is what made her new. And if that's what happens when one broken woman meets a merciful Savior, then the only question left tonight is, who's next? So as we close, I don't want to close focusing on what Mary did. I want to close on the question, what will you do with Jesus in the room tonight? Because you could hear about her worship and still refuse to worship. You could admire her surrender, but still stay in control of your life. And you could agree with the message and still walk out unchanged. But admiration is not transformation. The same Jesus who was in the house with Mary is in the house tonight. And he's still worthy of worship without walls. Mary didn't start with worship. She started with a decision. She didn't start with emotion. She started with movement. She didn't start with tears. She started with courage. And I want to say this as clear as I can tonight. This is still the pathway. It hasn't changed. You don't get forgiveness while staying at a distance. You don't get freedom while holding on to control. You don't get breakthrough while protecting your pride. And you don't get revival while staying comfortable. At some point, something has to break. And I wonder tonight, what are you protecting that God is asking you to pour out? Because some of us are one decision away from everything changing. One step away from the walls coming down. One moment away from life shifting forever. There's two groups in the room tonight. Those who are far from God, lost, burdened, carrying sin, and you know it. You try to fix yourself, hide it, manage it, ignore it, but you can't shake it. And tonight, Jesus isn't standing at a distance. He's calling you to his feet. Then there's those who know him but have built walls. Walls of pride, routine, dryness, distraction. You still come, but you don't come broken anymore. You don't come poured out anymore. You don't come like Mary. But that same invitation is for both. Come down, come low, come honest, come broken. Because nobody meets Jesus at eye level. They meet him at his feet. Mary didn't get forgiven because she cleaned herself up. She got forgiven because she came undone, and that's the difference. Religion tells you, fix yourself first. But Jesus says, come first, and I will fix you. Religion says, stand tall. Jesus says, fall low. Religion says, hold it together. Jesus says, let it break. Some of us have been trying to stand when God has been trying to get us to get low so he can lift us up. Because the only way up in the kingdom is always down first. What would happen in this room if people stopped watching people and just started worshiping and putting our eyes on Jesus? What would happen if pride died at the altar tonight? If shame broke down at the altar? If control was released at the altar? And if somebody finally said, I'm not leaving the way I came? Walls would come down. And here's the truth. God's not waiting on a better song. He's not waiting on a better moment. He's not waiting on a better atmosphere. He's waiting on surrender. So tonight, if you came broken, you're in the right place. If you came guilty, dry, and you came far, you're in the right place. Because the feet of Jesus are still the safest place a sinner can fall. I'll ask for the piano player. I invite you to stand with me if you're able. With every head bowed and every eye closed, no one's looking around. This is the most important moment of the service. Not the music, not the message, but what you do with what God just dealt with you about. So right now, with no one else in your view,